Ibrahim Traoré vs. General Michael Langley, the 2025 gold reserve clash exposed. Introduction. In early 2025, a wave of posts on X brought international attention to a brewing conflict between Burkina Faso's young and charismatic leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, and General Michael Langley, the commander of the United States Africa Command, AFRICOM. The core of the dispute, as highlighted in these posts, revolves around allegations that General Langley accused Traoré of misusing Burkina Faso's gold reserves for personal protection rather than for the benefit of the nation. These claims have sparked widespread debate, fueled by historical tensions, geopolitical interests, and the growing influence of social media in shaping narratives about African sovereignty and Western intervention. Additionally, X posts have referenced supposed U.S. intentions to arrest Traoré, with some users sharing AI-generated videos to support these claims, which require careful scrutiny. This analysis delves into the origins of the conflict, the veracity of the claims, the role of Burkina Faso's gold reserves, Traoré's nationalization efforts, and the broader implications of U.S. criticism. It also addresses the phenomenon of AI-generated misinformation and the historical parallels drawn by X users to past Western interventions in Africa, such as the case of Libya's Muammar Gaddafi. By critically examining the available evidence, this exploration aims to separate fact from speculation and provide a nuanced understanding of a complex geopolitical issue. Background on Ibrahim Traoré and Burkina Faso's political landscape. Who is Ibrahim Traoré? Ibrahim Traoré, a 36-year-old military officer, rose to prominence in Burkina Faso following a series of coups in 2022. He assumed power in September 2022 after overthrowing Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, who had himself led a coup earlier that year. Traoré, a captain in the Burkinabe military, positioned himself as a populist leader committed to addressing the country's security crisis, economic challenges, and foreign influence. His leadership has been marked by a strong anti-imperialist stance, drawing inspiration from Burkina Faso's revolutionary icon, Thomas Sankara, who led the country from 1983 until his assassination in 1987. Traoré's policies have focused on reclaiming national sovereignty, particularly over Burkina Faso's natural resources, including its gold reserves. His government has prioritized local control of the mining sector, which has long been dominated by foreign corporations, particularly from Canada, France, and Russia. His rhetoric resonates with a younger generation of Africans disillusioned by decades of Western influence and perceived exploitation of the continent's resources. Burkina Faso's security and economic context. Burkina Faso, a landlocked West African nation, faces significant challenges, including widespread poverty, political instability, and a growing jihadist insurgency linked to groups like Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. Since 2015, the country has been plagued by violence, with thousands killed and over 2 million people displaced. The security crisis has strained the economy, which relies heavily on agriculture and mining, particularly gold, which accounts for a significant portion of export revenue. Gold mining is a critical sector in Burkina Faso, which is one of Africa's top gold producers. In 2024, Traoré's government inaugurated the country's first gold refinery, a move aimed at increasing the value of its gold exports by processing the metal domestically rather than exporting it raw. This initiative is part of a broader strategy to nationalize key industries and reduce dependency on foreign powers. Traoré's appeal and anti-Western sentiment. Traoré's leadership style, marked by direct engagement with citizens and a rejection of Western influence, has earned him significant support among Burkinabe youth and across the African continent. His decision to pivot Burkina Faso's alliances toward Russia and away from traditional partners like France has drawn both praise and criticism. France, Burkina Faso's former colonial power, was expelled from military and diplomatic roles in the country under Traoré's leadership, a move that mirrors similar shifts in neighboring Mali and Niger. This shift has placed Traoré at odds with Western powers, particularly the United States, which maintains strategic interests in the Sahel region through AFRICOM. The accusations leveled by General Langley, as reported on X, must be understood within this context of rising tensions between African leaders seeking sovereignty and Western nations wary of losing influence in the region. General Michael Langley and AFRICOM's role in Africa. Who is General Michael Langley? General Michael E. Langley is a high-ranking U.S. Marine Corps officer and the commander of AFRICOM, a position he has held since August 2022. As the first African-American four-star general in the Marine Corps, Langley's appointment was historic, but his role as AFRICOM commander places him at the center of U.S. military strategy in Africa. AFRICOM, established in 2007, is tasked with overseeing U.S. military operations and partnerships across the continent, with a focus on counterterrorism, capacity building, and securing U.S. interests. Langley's tenure has coincided with a period of heightened geopolitical competition in Africa, as Russia and China expand their influence. His public statements, including those made during U.S. Senate hearings, often address the challenges of maintaining U.S. partnerships in the face of growing anti-Western sentiment and the rise of military-led governments in countries like Burkina Faso. AFRICOM's objectives and controversies. AFRICOM's presence in Africa has long been controversial. Critics argue that the command prioritizes U.S. geopolitical interests, such as access to resources and countering Chinese and Russian influence, over genuine partnerships with African nations. Operations in the Sahel, including support for counterterrorism efforts, have been criticized for their limited success in curbing insurgencies and for perceived violations of national sovereignty. In Burkina Faso, AFRICOM's activities have been limited since Traoré's government expelled French forces and reduced cooperation with Western militaries. The accusations against Traoré, as reported on X, suggest that Langley and AFRICOM view his leadership as a threat to U.S. interests, particularly in the context of Burkina Faso's gold reserves and its pivot toward Russia. The alleged accusation. According to posts on X, General Langley accused Traoré of using Burkina Faso's gold reserves for personal protection, rather than for the benefit of the country's people during a U.S. Senate hearing in early 2025. These claims, if true, would represent a significant escalation in U.S. rhetoric against Traoré's government. However, the lack of direct transcripts or official statements from the Senate hearing in the provided information makes it necessary to approach these claims with caution. X posts, while valuable for gauging public sentiment, are not conclusive evidence of official statements or policy positions. The accusation aligns with broader Western concerns about resource mismanagement in African nations, a narrative often used to justify sanctions or interventions. However, it also raises questions about the motivations behind such claims, given the historical context of Western interest in Africa's natural resources. The gold reserve clash. Burkina Faso's gold reserves. Burkina Faso is one of Africa's leading gold producers, with an estimated 12% of its GDP derived from the mining sector. Gold is the country's top export, and the sector employs thousands of Burkinabe, though much of the profit has historically gone to foreign companies. The construction of Burkina Faso's first gold refinery in 2024, under Traoré's leadership, was a landmark achievement aimed at retaining more value domestically. The refinery allows Burkina Faso to process its gold into higher-value products, reducing reliance on foreign refineries and increasing export revenue. Traoré's nationalization efforts have included stricter regulations on foreign mining companies, increased taxes, and a push for state ownership of key mining assets. These policies have been praised by supporters as a step toward economic independence but have drawn criticism from Western governments and corporations, who argue that they create an unstable investment environment. The allegation of misuse. The claim that Traoré is using gold reserves for personal protection is vague and requires scrutiny. In the context of Burkina Faso's security crisis, personal protection could imply diverting resources to bolster the military or secure the presidency against internal and external threats. However, without specific evidence, such as financial records or documented transactions, this accusation remains speculative. X posts referencing Langley's statement do not provide primary sources, such as a video or transcript of the Senate hearing, making it difficult to verify the exact nature of the claim. Critics of the accusation argue that it fits a pattern of Western narratives that portray African leaders as corrupt to justify intervention or sanctions. The comparison to Muammar Gaddafi, frequently mentioned in X posts, underscores this skepticism. Gaddafi's push for a gold-backed African currency and his nationalization of Libya's oil resources were cited as reasons for Western hostility, culminating in his overthrow in 2011. Traoré's supporters see similar dynamics at play, with the US and its allies allegedly seeking to undermine his leadership to maintain control over Burkina Faso's resources. Geopolitical implications. The gold reserve clash is not just about economic policy, it is deeply tied to geopolitical competition. Burkina Faso's shift toward Russia, including military cooperation and potential mining deals, has alarmed Western powers. Russia's Wagner Group, now rebranded as Africa Corps, has been active in the Sahel, providing security assistance to governments like Burkina Faso's in exchange for access to resources. The U.S., through AFRICOM, views this as a threat to its influence in the region. Langley's alleged accusation could be interpreted as an attempt to pressure Traoré's government or justify sanctions, which would align with U.S. strategies to counter Russian expansion. However, such actions risk further alienating African nations and fueling anti-Western sentiment, as evidenced by the strong reactions on X. Debunking AI-generated arrest video. The rise of AI-generated misinformation. One of the more alarming claims circulating on X is that the U.S. government seeks to arrest Traoré, with some users sharing videos purportedly showing evidence of this intent. These videos, described as AI-generated, are part of a growing trend of deepfake and synthetic media used to manipulate public perception. AI-generated content can create convincing but false narratives, making it critical to verify such claims. Analyzing the video without access to the specific videos mentioned on X, it is impossible to provide a detailed analysis of their content. However, the characteristics of AI-generated media typically include unnatural facial movements, inconsistent audiovisual synchronization, or anomalies in background details. Tools like deepfake detection software and reverse image searches can help identify such content, but the average social media user may not have access to these resources. The claim that the U.S. wants to arrest Traoré is highly speculative and lacks credible evidence. Arresting a sitting head of state would require extraordinary justification, such as an international criminal court warrant, and would have significant diplomatic repercussions. The absence of official statements from the U.S. government or AFRICOM supporting this claim suggests that the videos are likely misinformation, possibly created to inflame tensions or garner attention. The role of social media. X has become a powerful platform for shaping narratives, particularly in Africa, where it serves as a space for activists and citizens to challenge mainstream media. However, its open nature also makes it a breeding ground for misinformation. The viral spread of claims about Traoré's arrest highlights the need for media literacy and critical evaluation of sources. Users should cross-reference claims with reputable news outlets, official statements, or primary sources like Senate hearing transcripts before accepting them as fact. Traoré's gold nationalization and U.S. criticism. Nationalization. Traoré's push to nationalize Burkina Faso's gold industry is part of a broader trend in the Sahel, where military-led governments are seeking greater control over natural resources. In addition to building the gold refinery, Traoré's administration has renegotiated contracts with foreign mining companies, demanding higher royalties and local employment. These policies aim to address the historical imbalance where foreign firms extracted significant profits while local communities saw little benefit. The 2024 gold refinery, capable of processing 400 tons of gold annually, is a flagship project of Traoré's vision for economic sovereignty. By refining gold domestically, Burkina Faso can increase its export value, create jobs, and reduce dependency on foreign markets. This move has been celebrated by supporters as a bold step toward self-reliance but has raised concerns among Western investors, who fear reduced profits and restricted access. U.S. Criticism and double standard. The U.S. criticism of Traoré, as articulated by Langley's alleged statement, reflects a broader pattern of Western scrutiny of African leaders who challenged the status quo. The accusation of misusing gold reserves echoes similar critiques leveled against leaders like Zimbabwe's Robert Mugabe or Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro, where resource nationalization was framed as corruption or mismanagement. Critics argue that this narrative overlooks the structural inequalities of the global economy, where African nations have long been pressured to liberalize their markets for the benefit of Western corporations. Traoré's policies, while imperfect, aim to address this imbalance, but they threaten the interests of powerful actors, including U.S. and Canadian mining companies operating in Burkina Faso. The comparison to Gaddafi, frequently cited on X, highlights a perceived double standard. When African leaders assert control over resources, they are often labeled as authoritarian or corrupt, while Western governments and corporations are rarely held to the same standard for their role in resource extraction. This dynamic fuels distrust of U.S. intentions and strengthens Traoré's appeal as a defender of African sovereignty. Section 6. Historical parallels and public sentiment on X. The Gaddafi comparison. Many X posts draw parallels between Traoré and Muammar Gaddafi, who was killed in 2011 following a NATO-led intervention in Libya. Gaddafi's push for a gold-backed African currency and his nationalization of Libya's oil industry made him a target of Western powers, according to his supporters. The fear expressed on X is that Traoré's defiance of Western influence could lead to a similar fate, with Burkina Faso descending into chaos like Libya. While the situations are not identical, Gaddafi ruled for decades, while Traoré is a relatively new leader. The comparison resonates because of shared themes: resource sovereignty, anti-imperialism, and resistance to Western intervention. The memory of Libya's collapse looms large in African discourse, amplifying fears of foreign meddling. Public sentiment on X. The X posts provided reflect a strong pro-Traoré sentiment, with users framing Langley's accusation as part of a broader U.S. plot to undermine African leadership. Terms like House Negro used to describe Langley reveal the intensity of anti-Western sentiment, though such language is problematic and risks oversimplifying the issue. The posts also highlight a call for African unity, with some users urging the African Union to treat any action against Traoré as a declaration of war against the continent. This sentiment underscores the power of social media to amplify grassroots voices but also highlights the risk of polarization. The lack of verified evidence in these posts, such as direct quotes from Langley or official U.S. policy statements, suggests that the narrative is driven more by emotion than by substantiated facts. Critical analysis and broader implications verifying the claims. The central claim of Langley accusing Traoré of misusing gold reserves cannot be fully verified without primary sources. While X posts cite a U.S. Senate hearing, no official transcript or video evidence is provided in the referenced material. This gap underscores the importance of skepticism when evaluating social media claims, particularly on contentious issues. If Langley did make such a statement, it would likely be part of a broader U.S. strategy to pressure Traoré's government, possibly through sanctions or diplomatic isolation. The claim of U.S. intentions to arrest Traoré is even less credible, given the absence of official statements and the reliance on AI-generated videos. These videos, while potentially convincing, are likely part of a misinformation campaign, either to discredit Traoré or to inflame anti-Western sentiment. Geopolitical stakes. The clash over Burkina Faso's gold reserves is a microcosm of larger geopolitical struggles in Africa. The Sahel has become a battleground for influence, with the US, Russia, China, and former colonial powers like France vying for control. Traoré's alignment with Russia and his rejection of Western partnerships threaten the US's strategic interests, particularly in the context of counterterrorism and resource access. Sanctions, if imposed, could exacerbate Burkina Faso's economic challenges, potentially undermining Traoré's domestic support. However, they could also backfire, strengthening his image as a defender of African sovereignty and further alienating the US from the region. The role of misinformation. The spread of AI-generated videos and unverified claims on X highlights the growing challenge of misinformation in shaping public opinion. African activists and citizens increasingly rely on platforms like X to counter Western narratives, but the lack of rigorous fact-checking can amplify false or misleading information. This dynamic complicates efforts to understand the true nature of the Traoré-Langley dispute and underscores the need for media literacy. Future scenarios. The trajectory of this conflict depends on several factors. U.S. policy. If the U.S. escalates its rhetoric or imposes sanctions, it risks further alienating African nations and strengthening Russia's position in the Sahel. Traoré's governance. Traoré's ability to deliver on economic and security promises will determine his domestic support. Failure to address the insurgency or improve living standards could weaken his position, regardless of external pressures. African unity. The calls for African Union intervention reflect a desire for collective resistance to foreign influence. However, the AU's ability to act cohesively is limited by internal divisions and reliance on Western funding. Conclusion. The alleged clash between Ibrahim Traoré and General Michael Langley over Burkina Faso's gold reserves encapsulates the broader tensions between African sovereignty and Western influence. Traoré's nationalization policies, while controversial, reflect a growing demand for economic independence in Africa. The accusations leveled by Langley, as reported on X, lack verified evidence but align with historical patterns of Western criticism of African leaders who challenge the status quo. The spread of AI-generated arrest videos underscores the dangers of misinformation in shaping narratives, particularly on platforms like X, where emotional appeals can outpace factual reporting. While Traoré's leadership has inspired hope among many Africans, it also faces significant challenges, from internal security threats to external pressures. Ultimately, the Traoré-Langley dispute is more than a personal or bilateral conflict, it is a symbol of the broader struggle for control over Africa's resources and destiny. As Burkina Faso navigates this turbulent period, the world will be watching to see whether Traoré can fulfill his vision of sovereignty or whether external forces will shape the country's future.